Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined, as always, by Sam. We got a lot to break down from the Singapore Grand Prix from this past weekend. First off, though, Sam, how are you doing? And how did you enjoy the race overall before we get into the details of it all?
I'm doing all right. I feel like this was another race that may not have been 10 out of 10 entertainment all the way through, but there's still a lot of exciting storylines and interesting moments to go through for sure.
Yeah, I feel like every race this season, even if there's not some, the whole race wasn't great, there's at least something big to talk about from it. And that's no different this week. But before we get to the big stuff, we will start with this week's winner, George Russell, who wins in Singapore for his second win of the season by 5 seconds over Max Verstappen. Yeah, I thought it was a great drive from George this weekend, a really solid win. But what did you think from George's drive in Singapore, and his second win of the season after his first coming in Canada earlier in the year?
I mean, I thought it was fantastic. We talk about these some of the best drives of the season. I think this is right up there for me, putting it on pole and winning the race on a circuit that George said that he expected would be a circuit that they were not good at. And not just the car. I know personally for George too, it's been far from his best circuit. So to come out and not only win, but really dominate. I know this wasn't the largest margin of victory or anything on the year, but they put it on pole and they win the race. George does in a car that may have been very good this weekend, but certainly has not been the dominant car of the season, or and Russell hasn't been the dominant driver. So just a really really special weekend, honestly, and yeah, one of the most dominating weekends of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah, like you said, might not have been the most dominant start to finish in terms of seconds, margin of victory, but I think I don't think George really had to push himself like that, like we saw last year with Lando here, almost wrecking himself out of the race from so far ahead because he just kept pushing and pushing. In a tight street circuit like this, I'm not sure you really need to do that. George wasn't really threatened all day. They got through turn one and was fine from there. So I don't think he really had to, overly push the car, push the tires, anything. I think he just did exactly what he had to do, kept it clean, laid down solid lap times, and wasn't really challenged from there. I think he probably could have made that gap a little bit bigger if he wanted to, but I don't think he needed to. I think he just kind of, not manipulated, but just, methodically went through that race pretty well. And yeah, I think it also going off of what you said, not being George's best track. I mean, he has some scar tissue here. Uh, just a couple years ago when he was, him and Hamilton, the two Mercedes, were coming after the leaders in those final laps. He made a big mistake right at the end and took away a potential podium for him and, crashed out of the race. So to go from that to a race like this at the same track, I think is big for his confidence and kind of his future going forward. It really spells out nicely that he has gained a lot of confidence, gotten rid of some of the silly mistakes that we've seen in the past, and I think that'll play out really well into the future for him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, George has said it himself, and a lot of people at Mercedes have alluded to it about how really next year might be their year. And really, the most important thing the rest of this year is for them to gain confidence. I think George was already very confident on track, and Mercedes knows that they've produced plenty of championship cars in the past, but just using these last couple races, last few months of the season to really gel as a team. Not George specific, but to really bring on Antonelli as well, get him some more experience and get him in the right state of mind for next year. I think George can be a driver to watch for, and Mercedes will be a team to watch for next year. I think they're, we've talked about them kind of having these moments where they'll have a few weekends a year in this era where they'll kind of just pop up and randomly be the best car or the best team. So I'm not saying that they're all of a sudden top of the field, top of the grid for the rest of this year, but I do think it's a nice building block, a nice bit of momentum here, looking towards 26 in the future.
Yeah, kind of speaking on the future. Um, do you think that George Russell is, the kind of guy and the kind of driver right now that, given the right car, the right circumstances, he could compete for a drivers' championship with the guys like Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, the McLaren pair, some of the top drivers that we have in the sport right now. Do you think he's at that level at the moment? I mean, I feel like what we've seen this year has been very consistent. Taking wins when he has them, in Canada and here, they looked pretty fast, and he was able to come away with the wins in those circumstances and kind of, control things. I feel like we've kind of entered into a different phase. Obviously, you saw a lot of the young growth at Williams, a lot of the talent that was underlying there, but you couldn't really see all of it because he was driving a Williams at the time that was, really bad. But we knew that there was talent there, and then he goes to Mercedes. You're up against Lewis Hamilton. He did really well, I think, in those first few seasons, but there were a lot of, some growing pains, like we mentioned with the Singapore thing a couple of years ago, just making mistakes, maybe pushing a little too hard, not taking the things that are given to him. But I feel like he's kind of entering a different stage this year, a different level of driving that, if he's given a car like that, I think that there's a good shot that he could compete with, the likes of Max Verstappen, the best drivers that we have right now in F1 for a drivers' championship.
I would agree. I think he's certainly as much of a champion quality driver as anyone on the grid at the moment, bar Max. I mean, obviously, you look at guys like Lewis and Fernando have a great pass, and if they gave it the right car and the right situation at the moment, I'm sure it would still be up there as well. But as far as this next crop of drivers, this next group of young guys who are in their prime now, I would still say Max is a step ahead of everyone else, but I think if Mercedes give George the right car, he's absolutely a guy that can compete with the drivers' championship. And, I think if everybody was on level pegging out there with the cars, I think Russell would be right there and would be a very competitive with pretty much anybody else on the grid. So for me, I think he's absolutely championship quality. Even if I would still rank one or two other drivers ahead of him, namely Max, and I think there's arguments for and against some people like Leclerc and, the McLaren guys, I guess, as well. But for me, George is consistently a high quality driver. And I think, the right situation, he's absolutely a potential driver's champion, but it doesn't even have to be a gap the level that McLaren has had this year, for example. I think, even a slight advantage in car over someone like Max, I think would be enough to push George over the edge. And, even on his day, he can compete with anyone, including Max, including Lewis and Fernando and all the great drivers out there.
Yeah, I think everyone on equal cars, like you said, not necessarily like not necessarily all in the Red Bull because it's such a specific car. But just say you gave everyone the same kind of generic F1 car out there. Like I really do think, I still don't think Max would be beaten. I think that he would be the favorite, I would say. Not that he would be beaten. I would say he'd be the favorite of those guys to win a race, to win a championship like that. But whereas, like, a year or two ago, I would have thought, yeah, George will have his moments. He'll win some races in a situation like that. But the guys like Max or, even Charles or some of those guys, I think would beat him out over a season. Now, I'm not so sure. I mean, I still think that Max is the top dog at the moment from just a driver's perspective, but I really do feel like George has kind of stepped his game up in the last, year and a half, to where I do think that he could beat out, Max head to head for a whole season. I mean, I feel like that's a little crazy to say because of how good Max is. Uh, but I just think, like you said, on his day, if he can string together enough finishes, in pretty equal cars out there, I think that he would have a chance to compete with a guy like Max or anyone for the drivers' championship.
Yeah, I mean, if they all had exactly equal cars, I think I would still put Max a touch ahead. But I don't think it's a route. I don't think it's miles ahead. I think, um, like I said, the thing with George is consistency, and that's something that's really needed to win a drivers' championship. We've seen uh, both Norris and Piastri, for different reasons, drop points this year, and that's the reason why someone like Max is able to still, be potentially in contention, even if he probably won't win it. So I think that's something that George, like we said, he has ups and downs, I guess, but he's so much more consistent than a lot of other drivers out there, and just the kind of guy that can be in the background and just do his thing and still show up on the podium or even win races. So yeah, I definitely would back him against most of the grid, and even the other top guys. I would probably back him against the majority of the top guys, bar Max, and then I think you can have your arguments with Leclerc either way. But for me, George is up there with almost anyone.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, if you had to kind of rank them, it just like from a pure driver's perspective, fairly equal machinery. I would still say Max number one, but then after that, I feel like it's pretty wide open for that two spot, and I think George has really, vaulted himself up into that conversation of um, Leclerc, Piastri, Norris. It's hard because you have a guy like Lewis Hamilton, a guy like Fernando Alonso on the grid, and we know how talented they are still, but I don't think it's unfair to say that they're not necessarily at their peak level anymore. So it's not like, I'm saying George is better than prime Lewis or prime Fernando, but it just, current right now drivers rankings, I think George would be ahead of those guys. And then it's kind of between him, Leclerc, and I think the McLaren duo to, kind of fight out for that two spot. But I think also that two spot has kind of gotten a little bit closer to Max than maybe, we would have said a year or two ago. I think some of these guys are kind of stepping up their games.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, we saw George go against Lewis for 3 years as teammates,
Mm-hmm.
and they ended up pretty level as far as points and their contribution to the team, just as far as strictly on track wins, podiums, etc. So, I don't think it's unfair at this point to compare George to someone like Lewis or Fernando, just strictly on at the moment. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
those guys certainly have more accomplished careers, but I think I think it's fair to put George up against pretty much anybody else. Like we said, I would, if all the machinery was equal, I think I would give him the edge over both the McLaren drivers. And then it's really tough to tell. What Leclerc's been kind of tough to judge this season because the Ferrari just the car and the team has just been kind of all over the place. I still believe in his pace, but I think they'd be pretty close over a season if they were teammates. I think that would be a heck of a battle to watch.
Yeah, some of those wins last year for Leclerc and some of those, other podium finishes are hard to look past. So yeah, I agree that it's probably pretty close between those two for that second spot. But I just think it's I feel like George has really kind of moved ahead of where he was a year or two ago from kind of a driver's ranking perspective and potential world champion one day. Getting to kind of the rest of, I guess, the main course of the Grand Prix and the talk of the talk of the town, so to speak. The McLaren drama kind of continues once again, another week where there's some inter-team drama, and that's what's going to happen when you got two guys battling for a championship on the same team with 6 races left at this point. But it's so it all kind of starts on that lap 1, turn 2, where Lando tries to make some moves up the inside, get aggressive on a race start. And it's kind of wheel to wheel with Piastri. Verstappen's kind of in there as well, ahead, and they bang wheels, and Lando's able to get ahead. And Oscar immediately on the radio, pretty upset about it. Just kind of asking if that's fair, if that's kind of the team game that they're playing, if they may swap positions or whatever. McLaren ultimately decide to do none of those things and just let the race play out from there. And that's really what the main talk of the Grand Prix was from a championship perspective. But do you think that Lando move was dirty racing? Do you think it was clean, kind of just a racing incident type situation? And do you think that they should have swap positions to put Oscar back ahead, or do you think it was fair? Just from a racing and a driver's perspective, to let them race it out from the positions that they were in after that incident.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't call it a clean move, but I also don't think it was overtly malicious. I think, one of my biggest takeaways from this race was just being tired of the whole conversation around papaya rules and the fairness of this championship. I think we're at a point now, they've already locked up the drivers or the constructors championship. There's really no reason why these guys can't just fight it out on track. Points, pit stops, penalties, all those things. Like, let the chips fall where they may. Let these guys battle it out. I think that's what we want to see as fans. I think we don't want to see these guys keep being asked to swap places or being asked to do this or that in fairness of their teammate. At the end of the day, these two guys are racing for a world title, and I know there's room for error now, with Max being in the background. Maybe a bad race or two, these guys knock each other out of a race and Max wins, and all of a sudden there's a real chance of a Max championship. But I think for me, just let these guys go. I think it was an aggressive move by Lando, and it was not the cleanest move, but I also don't think it was overly malicious. And I think at the end of the day, I understand Oscar being a little frustrated with the way that the rules have been applied, but I understand Lando's position of, like, this might be my only chance at a track like Singapore to make a move. And at the end of the day, Oscar's still on the track, Lando's still on the track, and so is Max in front of him where the initial contact was. I don't really see a too much harm or foul here. Maybe it was a little over aggressive, but it's a turn 1, lap 1 move. Lap 1, just going for it. I just, I'm definitely getting tired of all the back and forth, and I don't really see the issue other than it being maybe a little over aggressive. But at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do at this point in the championship.
Yeah, I think that lays it out pretty well. I think that everyone's been pretty on Lando for the past 2 years of, where's your aggressive driving? When are you going to get your elbows out? When are you going to, really take these battles to these other guys? Especially on these race starts where he's just been, just to be honest, like, pretty awful the past year or two. And he finally gets a good start, is aggressive with it, and he immediately gets backlash for it. I think that's a little bit of a double standard. Granted, I do see why Oscar might be a little upset. I mean, contact with your teammate is, I guess, what they've been trying to avoid from a team perspective so far this year. Um, but we haven't had a point where there's been contact and then they've, I'm not sure if the rule, internally was if there's contact, give the position to back to the guy who was in the lead before the pass was trying to be made. I don't know if that was, maybe an internal discussion at McLaren that we're just not aware of. But if that's not the case, and the rule is, just don't hit each other. Yeah, Lando might have broke that rule, but he also it's not like he hit him off the track. He hit him into the wall. He ended his race. Like you said, he hit. Tapped Max. He tapped Oscar. And the only one who came out of there with actual damage was Lando himself. I think the only race he really he might have hurt was his own. With the front wing damage. It's still hard to pass at Singapore. I'm not sure it would have really made a difference in the end, but who knows, if that might have helped him out a little bit. So, yeah, I think if, anybody's race was hurt there, yes, Oscar's race was obviously hurt. He, lost a position that he was never able to recover from. But, you know, like a rest of the race performance wise, or, sending anyone into the wall, that didn't happen. So yeah, I don't think it was an unfair situation. And I also think, like you said, we're at a point where they've locked up the constructors. They can freely kind of race it out amongst themselves. And if the stewards aren't going to make any rule or make any ruling on it, if they're not going to call a penalty on it, then I don't think McLaren should feel obligated to do that internally as a team. I think at this point you leave it up to the racing standards that are, set amongst the rule book. Now, those are sometimes not always applied exactly evenly, throughout a season, but I think you just leave it up to the rules officials to make that call, to where you don't have to upset, one of your two drivers in that situation. By making that call as a team yourself. So I think, as a team, McLaren in this situation played it right. Maybe some of the lead up might have, caused Oscar to feel slightly, the way he did about the situation. But I don't think they should have, made any other decision than the one that they ultimately came to at the end of the day, because I don't think it was that terrible of a move by Lando. And also, it's a turn one, lap one kind of situation where there's there might be contact. That's just the nature of the game. These cars are in close proximity, they're on colder tires, stuff like this is going to happen. So it's not like it was lap 30 and it was Lando trying to make a pass on Oscar when there was nobody else around, and he just barged into the side of him. It was lap one, turn one, everybody's bunched up anyways. Sometimes this stuff happens, and that's another reason why the FIA didn't, and the stewards didn't call Lando out on it and give him a penalty, is because they're pretty lenient in that type of situation anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I just looking at it, reading the quote and about the papaya rules that Zach Brown gave, and it basically just says, race hard, race clean, but don't touch each other. But at the end of the day, I mean, you've already got the constructors locked up. Even before this race, really 10 races ago, maybe more, you already had the constructors locked up. You're here. We're all here to race. We're all here to see these guys duke it out and see who can be a crowned world champion. So at the end of the day, I don't really see the issue with these guys just duking it out at this point. They're not going to go intentionally run each other into the fence or into the gravel. They're professionals at the end of the day, and they want to win races. They want to be on podiums. They don't want to risk crashing out. But McLaren should let them be aggressive, let them go for it at this point in the season. There's really nothing left to lose. I understand they could technically lose the drivers' championship, but I mean, you've already got the constructors locked up, and the odds are very, very high that one of your drivers is going to win the drivers' championship. I just don't see the point. I understand keeping that rule in place of don't run into each other, because it's obviously the a correct thing to do, to keep it clean. But I just don't want to see the racing compromised and McLaren playing referee, like you mentioned. If the FIA isn't going to adjudicate it and say, okay, 5 second, 10 second, whatever, there's no reason for McLaren to do that and to change the order and risk showing favoritism or not showing favoritism. At the end of the day, it's a race, and that's what we want to see these guys do.
Yeah, it's not like he dumped him, right? It's not like he did what we saw in NASCAR at the Roval this weekend. Completely sent him. Their wheels tapped. It was slight contact. It was a racing incident, and a lap one, turn one, turn two, whatever type of situation. That's just going to happen. It's in the nature of the game that stuff might happen. And I don't think it was, egregious enough to where it was anything that was outside of, like proper sporting, like etiquette. I don't think it was, an egregious move. It was that there was contact. It was physical. But that's a part of racing also. And like I said, if the stewards aren't going to do anything about it, I don't think it's up to McLaren to make that decision ultimately. I think that they have the right to just say, yeah, from a rules perspective, there was nothing wrong with it. So we don't feel the need to, interject ourselves here and, really fracture the driver relationship even more than it already is. So yeah, I don't think that there was any reason really for them to get involved. I do see why Oscar would be upset. I mean, getting hit by your teammate is, not what you want to have happen. You think that you guys would, give a little bit more room in racing each other like that. But it's like it's a first turn kind of situation. Stuff gets misjudged. Stuff gets, people, bounce off each other and all that all the time. So, like I said, I don't think it was anything so far out of the realm that they, needed to take action against it.
I agree. I mean, we've obviously all fans have had their issues over time with the FIA, but this is one where if the FIA doesn't see an issue with it, I don't think it's worth the team getting involved. And so in that perspective, I think McLaren did the right thing here. I think it was again a little over aggressive, but also Lando kind of had to be in that moment, so I don't fault him for it. And it ended up I don't want to say working out for everyone because, like you said, it didn't for Oscar, but things also could have been much worse. At a track like Singapore, one small mistake, they could have both ended up in the wall, and instead they end up, with solid finishes and really, honestly, not making a massive difference in the championship. It's only a few point swing here for Lando, so I think it's, at the end of the day, McLaren did the right thing here. Even though Oscar may feel hard done by, and I understand that because, technically Lando broke the golden rule here by touching, but also, you start next to each other almost every race. That's going to happen eventually. So, yeah, I understand Oscar being hard done by here a little bit, but I think at the end of the day, McLaren made the right call, and I hope that they're going to let him race the rest of the way with nothing to lose on the constructors front.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it, a little bit earlier of Oscar may feel, a little upset because, just the rest of the season has been kind of called from a papaya rules perspective. Do you think that he's kind of on the worst end of the papaya rules deal more frequently than, say, Lando is? Or do you think it's more of a, just the way that the circumstances unfold in each specific situation, that just kind of make it seem like it's leaning more towards Lando? Or what do you make of, kind of that, that situation that we've all seen, play out in, like the social media crowd of Lando's getting the favoritism. from the McLaren side. Do you think that it is something like that, or more just that's just how the situations are playing out?
Well, I think it has worked out more in Lando's favor, but I think that hasn't always been intentional. There's been a couple times where maybe Lando tried an alternate strategy and it ended up working out. And also, frankly, neither Lando or Oscar has had anything to do with this, but obviously Lando's had some technical problems, bad pit stops, car breaking down, and Oscar's had a bit of that too. But I think, you know, I think going into the season, I'm sure McLaren assumed that Lando would be the driver to carry the mantle for the year. And, there may have been times throughout the year, especially early in the year, where they showed Lando a little favoritism in that. But I don't think it's some grand conspiracy. I think there have just been times where it's worked out a little better in Lando's favor, but that hasn't stopped Oscar so far, obviously.
Yeah, I think a lot of the strategy stuff, I agree, hasn't been a favoritism of Lando. I think I've been pretty, open in my opinion that they've been letting the strategists, fight amongst themselves this season. And I just think that the strategy has, landed on Lando's favor more often than it has Oscar's this year. But I just think that's, better strategy working out for Lando from his side of the garage than from Oscar's. The one part I will say that I feel like has been maybe a little bit more given a little more leeway to Lando would be this, rule of don't touch each other. We've seen them, freak out whenever Oscar has come, anywhere near Lando with some of these pass attempts that we saw earlier in the year. But with this one, obviously they do, make contact, and Lando is, I didn't hear anything on the radio to Lando that, you shouldn't have done that. You compromised, the potential for the race for both cars. Like, that could have been a lot worse. Could have taken your teammate out. I didn't really, see any of that. So that would be the one area where I'd say maybe they're giving Lando a little more leeway. I don't know. There might be a lot more behind the scenes that we're not hearing. There might have been radio that we didn't hear that I'm not aware of. That would be the only area, though. Other than that, I don't think that they've been stacking the deck against Oscar this year. Last year you could say that definitely because Lando was in the fight for the championship and Oscar wasn't. This season, I don't think that that's really been the case from a macro perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I don't think it's a grand conspiracy. I think maybe there was an idea going into the season of who would be favored, but not in a, just in a traditional sense of having a first driver and a second driver, as many championship teams have had. So I don't think at this point in the year, I don't think one side of that McLaren's brass is rooting for one side of the garage versus the other. I think as long as you secure one of them winning the drivers' championship, I think that's the priority right now, is keeping it out of the hands of Max Verstappen, or just avoiding a total collapse here down the stretch.
Yeah, I agree. Let's look at the championship, more broadly. Did anything in your mind change in the championship this weekend? With the results coming out of Singapore, Max finishing P2, Lando P3, Oscar P4. Now Oscar 336 total points, Lando 22 points away in second, and then Max 63 points behind with 6 races remaining in third in the championship. Um, any thoughts about whether the outlook of the championship has changed if some guys did enough, some guys didn't do enough this weekend to help their championship odds.
I don't think it has drastically. I did think it was interesting that Max gained some ground this weekend, but he now needs more points per race on average than he did a week ago to
Mm-hmm.
win the title. I believe he's up from 10 to 10.5 is what I read. But still, I've checked the odds before this, and he has slightly better odds than I remember him having before Singapore. So I think that maybe reflects the expectations for Max and for Red Bull at that track. Obviously, we talked on the last pod about how they might have some low expectations there given their past history, both Max individually and as a team. So the fact that they finish ahead of both McLarens, given that, I'm sure they'd like to be on the top step of the podium, but I still think as far as the championship goes, that's a big win for Max to finish ahead of both McLarens. And, clearly McLaren does not have the gap that they used to the rest of the field, to Max's Red Bull, to George Russell and the Mercedes, etc., that they used to have. So I think that nothing really changes for me. I think it kind of stays the same. Of Max makes up a little ground on most tracks. You'd like to see him make up some more, but given that it's Singapore, I think he. If there's going to be one track that he struggles on, I think most people would assume that one. He does have a pretty solid history at COTA, the next track coming up, and I think that could be a track that suits their car a little better. So I think, we talked about evaluating Max's title odds after Singapore, and that we kind of know either way. But it kind of, in my opinion, I guess I don't think it played out that way. I think, we can't rule him out any more than we did before Singapore, but we also can't say, in my opinion, I would guess that it's any more likely than it was. I think if he goes out and wins at COTA and the car looks dominant, then maybe we'll start to inch closer to it. But we're kind of holding serve at the moment as far as the Max versus the McLaren's battle. And then I guess just for the two McLarens, kind of the same thing, honestly. Kind of Piastri obviously loses a little bit of ground here to Norris, but relatively holds serve. I think his points per race needed would be a little more after that race, Lando, just given the number of races left and where he's at points wise. So in that way, it's kind of a win for Oscar, even though Lando finishes better in this race. But if you're Lando, really all you can do at this point is focus on finishing ahead of Oscar, and he got the job done there. So Lando could really use a win, I think, at COTA to sort of change the narrative a little bit. Even if Oscar finishes P2 and manages to keep it close, I think it would go a long way for Lando here in the championship battle, just to have a win, regardless of how much damage it does in the points.
Yeah, I let's start with your McLaren part here. Those two drivers. I think that Matt or Lando. I'm not sure he's done enough in these past 2 weeks, just given the results of Oscar Piastri. We obviously touched on that after Baku, where Oscar, didn't finish with any points. Lando only able to get a P7 out of that, and then here he finishes ahead of Oscar, but not by much. And with 2 races in a row where Oscar was unable to finish on the podium, from a guy who's looked so good all year, and then I feel like the past couple weeks he's been off his game a little bit. He hasn't been the perfect kind of controlled, level-headed Oscar that we've seen the rest of the year. This is when you needed to strike if you were Lando, and I'm just not sure that he's done that. Granted, yes, he's gained points the last 2 weekends. Point is a solid, is a positive. I just think he could have done more these past 2 weeks with no podium finishes for Oscar. you would think looking from the outside, a month ago, if you would have said Oscar went 2 races in a row without a podium, you would think Lando would have, gained a pretty significant points haul back on Oscar. And he just hasn't done that. But yeah, it's technically positive because he's gained points, and I think he showed a lot out there. Just kind of that he has the fight, and Oscar's not gonna walk away with this thing. I think that's a really big momentum swinger. What happened, in that turn one incident between the two. So I think that's something that could change the momentum of the championship. But yeah, like you said, a win would be really needed for Lando right now, because even wins at this point, you're gaining 7 points if Oscar's able to max out the rest of those points there. So, but we also have some more sprint races coming up, and that's gonna give out even more points possibilities there. So there's a lot of points left to be had, which is why this thing is not over by any means. On top of the fact that there's, even if you took away the sprint race, extra points there, it'd still be a pretty compelling and close championship battle at this point.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely not over. Even for Max, I think, yeah, it's still. I was gonna say wishful thinking. I don't even know if it's wishful thinking, but he does need to be perfect from here on out. Uh, but yeah, it's anybody's ball game at this point, especially between Lando and Oscar. There's still a lot of time, and the incidents of this weekend could lead to some future drama between those two, on track drama. More incidents, more maybe. Oscar feels compelled to get a little more aggressive now, and the gloves kind of feel like they're off. So I think we could really see some fireworks at Coda between those two, and between Max looking to maybe get kind of desperate here to seize the moment and go for a win. So I'm certainly excited for Coda. It's one of my favorite tracks, and I think we're going to get some real entertainment between those three in a couple weeks.
Yeah, going to the Max point though, real quick before we hit our personal podiums, um, I do think that just looking at it on paper, seeing the minus 63 points to Oscar next to Max's name with 6 points left, or 6 races left, that just kind of I guess hit me that it is much more of an uphill battle remaining than I guess what I even expected. It would be, just given the momentum that he's had since the summer break. That being said, I still think it's definitely possible. There's plenty of opportunities left for Max, some really solid Max tracks remaining. Sorry for the rhyming there, but there's some solid Max tracks left for him to perform really well at, that he's performed well at in the past. But the 63 point deficit is tough. On top of that, though, one thing for Max is, like you said, the McLarens have been, struggling the past 3 races. The pace just isn't there as much. And if you can get guys like Mercedes, and Ferrari taking points away from the McLarens, finishing ahead of them, and then Max can, go out and get solid wins, solid podium finishes, and you have those other guys, taking some spots from the McLarens, that could really help him out too. So for as much as of a runaway as the constructors has been, McLaren, they really need to nail the car for these, and how good the car has been. They really need to nail the car for these last few races, because if they're performing like they have been, there's opportunities for a big Max comeback, and that some other teams will steal points there as well. So they got to be weary of that if you're McLaren, but if you're Max, that could be a big opportunity to gain big points hauls and big chunks of points back in the championship, which is what you really need right now if you're in his situation.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, since the summer break, Max has been second, first, second in 4 races. So, that's a lot to ask most drivers to keep up that pace. But if Red Bull has the car for him, we know he can do it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's kind of what gives you hope if you're a Max fan right now, that the car is rounding into form at the right time, and that all he really needs is either a lucky break or two, or just to be lights out for 6 races, and maybe he's got a shot here. So yeah, it's certainly it just still feels like an outside chance, but if anybody can do it, it's him. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully Austin can provide us some entertainment there.
Yeah, I think it will. It usually provides some pretty good races. Let's move to our personal podiums now to the main event. I have in my first spot George Russell. I just think it was a really good drive from him this weekend. I don't think you could have anybody else in that spot, in my opinion, at least. I mean, there were some other good drives out there, certainly, but um, what George did, I just think he controlled that race from start to finish. There was a chance that Max might be able to do something with soft tires at the start and jump George, who was on the mediums, but that was never to be. And George, from Friday on, really, especially Saturday and Sunday, he was, kind of the main man out there in Singapore. So, yeah, it was a really solid drive from him. And to me, there's nobody else you could put in the one spot. But who do you have in your number one position on your personal podium?
I'm right there with you. I agree. No one else you could have this weekend other than George Russell. It's kind of hard pressed for me to, when they put it on pole and win the race in dominating fashion. Unless the car is miles better, it's kind of tough for me to put anybody else in P1, and I think it's pretty clear that George deserves it this weekend. Just a superb drive, and like I said earlier, I think one of the best of the year.
Yeah, I agree. In P2, I have Carlos Sainz. Continues a great little run for him. P18 to P10 drive. You kind of start wonder, are things finally clicking for Sainz and Williams, that duo that's been gotten off to a rough start in their partnership, but I think things are starting to turn around here. It seems like he's gotten better and better with the car as the season's gone along. There's been some areas where just freak things happen, and he's lost out on races where he might have had good points hauls, but mechanical issues, or getting into on track scraps with other drivers has really cost him good points. But these last 2 weeks have been really incredible for Carlos, and on a track where it's really difficult to overtake, to gain 8 positions, starting near the back, and get some at least 1 point for Williams. I thought it was a really good drive from Carlos, so he takes my second spot.
Yeah, for me, not to spoil you here, but my P2 is your P3. So I'll just go ahead and say Fernando Alonso coming in with a P7, qualified 10th, just putting the Aston Martin in Q3, even if this is a track that might have lined up a little better for them, still very impressive. And then to come out during the race, has a 9-second pit stop, has some on track quarrels with Isaac Hadjar, especially. It still goes from P10 to P7 with a few really nice overtakes and nice moments there. It shows that he's still got it, and is, a really superb drive from him. I always love it when Aston Martin gives him at least a decent car, because he's one of my favorite drivers to watch fight in the midfield and at the top of the field. And, this season feels like it's been kind of quiet from him because of Aston's struggles. But this is one of those performances that reminds you why he's great. And even if he's even if he's not the same driver he was, he's still one of the best in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, like you said, I have him in my third spot, P7 with the slow pit stop. And on top of that, I just think even if he would have finished 20th, I might have had to put him here just because we got some incredible, classic Alonso radio, some great F1 radio moments from Alonso this week with you know, the guy engineer updating him lap 34, him, leave me alone or I'm going to disconnect the radio if you keep talking. And then later on with that spat with Hadjar, saying trophy for the king of race. I just thought that was a really, a really solid radio call from Alonso. So we just got some, really great content moments from Alonso this weekend that, I have to appreciate. And on top of that, he put in a great drive as well. So he had to be on my podium somewhere. And I think the two guys ahead had, better drives, not much better drives, but better drives. And, I like the fight we were seeing out of Alonso this weekend. So I give him my third spot.
Yeah, we did get some all-time radios from Alonso. I think the ones you mentioned, and then also at the end of the race, kind of unloading a little bit on Ferrari. I don't know if you saw this, just with the whole situation with Hamilton losing his brakes and still finishing the race. Alonso almost catches him there at the end and then kind of unloads on the radio afterwards. I think it was, we didn't really talk much about that, but just another bizarre Ferrari moment, them just losing the brakes at the end of the race, Hamilton cutting corners, trying to find a way to the end, and Alonso wasn't having it. But just he's one of the best on track. Is also one of the best on the radio. One of the best of all time, no doubt.
Yeah, that if I got to go back and look at what lap times Lewis was laying down in those last couple of laps, because Fernando was miles back and somehow almost caught him. I know Hamilton had no brakes on a street circuit, so yeah, he's not going to be zooming around the track. But I do have to go back and see what the lap times were there, because it'd be kind of comical to see what the other guys are laying down and then Hamilton with like 20 seconds slower lap times or something going around. But yeah, going back to Alonso, I think it was really it was an all-time weekend from the radio perspective.
Yeah, it was funny that they didn't really show too much of it on the broadcast, and then going back and seeing Hamilton's on board after, and he's just, I know there's not much he can do in that situation, but he's just kind of launching it over the corners and, just ripping it straight through. He obviously tried to do it as safely as possible, but that was certainly a dangerous situation. I wonder if things would have gotten worse earlier, how the FIA would have handled that. But, I know they have their protocols in place, and it sounds like Alonso was upset that they didn't get used in that moment. Even if it was mostly bad towards the end of the race, it's still certainly dangerous to have that issue, especially on a street circuit.
Yeah, I don't think Hamilton, I think they would have called him in if it had been, even a couple laps prior the brake failure, because he wouldn't have finished in the points anyways with how slow he had to go around there. So yeah, I'm not sure if, they would have had to do much anyways, because I think Ferrari probably would have called him in, but just like the gap that those guys had over 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, I think it allowed Ferrari to, let Lewis try and stay out and finish in the points there. Who was your P3 for your personal podium before we get to Stinker of the Week?
Well, I mean, I really thought that Carlos Sainz's performance was excellent. Obviously, they get disqualified over qualifying, and then to make it all the way back up into the points on a track like Singapore, especially, obviously, it's an improved Williams this year, but it's not It's not like what the McLaren was the first half of the year or whatever. So to make up that much ground in a midfield car on a track like Singapore is extremely impressive. Just to give a shout out to someone else too, since we've got the same three for the most part here. I'll say a guy who had a really nice weekend is Ollie Behrman. Comes in, gets a nice points finish for Haas. Kind of dunks on Esteban Ocon. Just really, Ocon had a really rough weekend fighting with the Alpines there in the back. And Ollie was kind of due for a big weekend. I mean, he's not had a lot of points finishes recently. I think he's only had one since Bahrain. I mean, I'm looking at his page right now. Not Monza. The Netherlands was his only other points finish, I believe, since Bahrain up until this weekend. So, he hasn't had a terrible season. He's been hanging around that 11 to 13 range in a lot of races. So, especially in a Haas that isn't amazing, not a terrible year by any means, but it had been a while with the exception of Zandvoort since he had a big weekend. And this felt like it was much needed from him and really kind of dominated his teammate this weekend.
I completely forgot that Bahrain wasn't the first race of the season this year. So when you said that, it kind of took me back a little bit. I mean, it was still only the fourth race of the season, and I feel like Behrman's been pretty solid this year. I mean, he's kind of been a little bit of the forgotten man amongst the rookie class that's been really well. But I feel like Behrman's done a little bit better than that for the majority of the season. But I guess he just hasn't really. He's been close, just hasn't had as many points finishes as you'd think. But yeah, it was a really good drive for Behrman too this weekend.
Yeah, I saw it. I can't remember whether it was a tweet or a Reddit post about that. The fact that Behrman's technically out of drivers that have raced the full season, he's in last. I mean, the only drivers behind him are those two, the rotating Alpine seat, Colapinto and Doohan. Well, he's tied with Bortoleto, I guess, but he's right behind Tsunoda, Gasly. He's really one good race behind likes of Ocon and Lawson and Stroll. Like, there's not a big midfield gap this year, and he just, like we mentioned, had that string of P11s. I've been a lot of races right on the outside looking in, so I'm sure we'll do more retrospectives later on, but I don't think it's been a bad season for him. I think it's just been a close but no cigar for most of the season. But this week he gets the job done, and so even though I really thought Carlos had a great weekend, just to switch it up, I'll go ahead and give Ollie this third spot.
Yeah, real quick before we get to Stinker of the Week, it's crazy that you said Ollie was in last of the full-time drivers for this season, and yet he's only right behind Tsunoda, who's been in a Red Bull for pretty much the whole season, bar two races. That's just crazy that the Red Bull with that second driver thing has been that bad that he's only right there ahead of Behrman, who's a rookie in a Haas, and then around the Alpines as well, who've been kind of horrific for most of the year.
Yeah, and the crazy thing too is that 3 of Tsunoda's points are from the China Sprint when he was still in a Racing Bull. So
yeah.
I mean, if you obviously he earned those points, but if you just go on Red Bull points, yeah, it's 2 less races, but he'd have less points than Behrman through the course of the season. So I feel like there's going to be a lot. There's already been a lot of discussions, but I wonder retrospectively how this Yuki Tsunoda season is going to age, how we're going to look back at it, because obviously he's going against Max, but it's been a kind of a generational whooping here from one teammate to another. So yeah, I mean, it may have to do with how well Perez does next year coming back, and how well Tsunoda, who knows where he's going to end up. But it'll be interesting to look back at that in a few years and see how it's aged.
Speaking of Perez, My stinker of the week is a guy who didn't even race this weekend. It is Sergio Perez. I didn't think that, it might sound odd because he didn't race this weekend, but uh, let me explain. So, I don't think anybody really had a terrible weekend this weekend. I was trying to go through and find a stinker of the week, and then I remembered Cadillac posted a video of Sergio in the sim, and just getting some promotional content out there. It was great. It looked great. But then you look at the video a little closer, and they kind of pan through a shot of the car actually on track in the sim, like a video of the car in the sim, and Perez is coming out of he's like spinning, coming like out of being stuck like in the barrier. Like they posted a video of like for promotional content of their driver in the sim crashing the car. Like I just think that that's stinker of the week worthy in my opinion. I don't know how you didn't look at that, how no one reviewed that and said let's post a different clip. Let's maybe find one where the car isn't in the wall, where they're not going from the barrier back onto the track. I don't know, maybe that might have been a good idea. So yeah, maybe not even Sergio, maybe the Cadillac social team might be my stinker of the week for putting Sergio in that position. I don't know, but I didn't feel like anyone was so bad this week that I had to do stinker of the week. So I thought maybe what the heck, Sergio crashing in the sim for Cadillac in testing. What the heck? Let's just throw it in there for stinker of the week. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I missed this video, but uh, there's got to be a million other things you could post for social content, or just have them do another lap or something. I don't know, just
Yeah.
something to get some points on the board and not have it blow back in your face. Uh, yeah, it's really this is a couple weeks in a row now. We've had social teams uh, play into our stinker of the week after
Yeah.
Alpine's tweet the week before. So, um, yeah, just a fascinating choice from Cadillac to post that. Um, for me, I agree. It's kind of hard to find one. I mean, another not amazing week from the likes of Ferrari and Alpine, teams that we've picked on many times through this year. Um, I'm just gonna go with McLaren. Even though this wasn't an all-time awful weekend, both cars stayed on track. I think a part of it's just like I mentioned earlier, just being kind of tired of the whole uh, fairness papaya rules system, but also they got to figure out this pit stop situation. I mean, almost every race now
It is
since
bad.
summer break, they've had major pit stop issues. They have them this race. It goes towards Oscar that it has the pit stop struggles. Lando's obviously had his fair share of struggles. The team around him, uh, not the driver himself. But yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm at. Is it's not an all-time weekend. It's not an all-time stinker of the week, but just a little bit of, uh, I guess, frustration with how the whole situation there is playing out, and also, got to get this figured out if you're going to clean things up here, and one of your drivers is going to take the drivers' championship.
Yeah, that's a good call on the pit stop then, because you're right. It's been bad for a few weeks now, a few races now, and um, I feel like no one's really explained what's going on there, what the issue is. If it's just mistakes by the guys, or if it's something else wrong with between the the bolt and the gun. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. If it's kind of like what we were seeing from Sauber last year, maybe not to that level, but some issue there with the pit stops. I don't know, but we haven't really had much explanation as to why those issues are happening. Yeah, that's a great call there. Kind of a mini stinker of the week. Like you said, I just feel like it was hard to find someone who really stood out as just horrible this weekend. So yeah, I think that's a good call.
Yeah, I mean, nothing wrong with that. It's a good weekend when, nobody screws up too much. I mean, I guess, like
Yeah,
I said, there's some teams that I'm sure wish they could have this weekend back, but we're kind of saying some of the same teams over and over again here. So
yeah.
nice to switch it up a little bit. And yeah, especially with the Cadillac, that was really off the grid, or I guess with Checo and the social media team, that was really off the map there. So appreciate switching up a little bit.
Yeah, I'll send you the video. I found it on Instagram again, but it's funny, like no one in the comments even like you have to go like 10 comments down to find the first person. It's like, hey, you posted a video of Checo in the wall. Not sure what you were doing there. But anyways, uh well, that's everything I think for this week. We'll be back at the next race to recap everything from Coda. Should be a really good one. Championship battles tightening up. So yeah, I'm really excited for that one. But that's everything from this week. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see y'all later.